Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. I went to a party a while ago where I met a few lovely women, strong, confident, beautiful, intelligent, successful women. And we'd known each other all of 5 minutes when all three of them told me in some form or another that they'd been cheated on by their husbands or partners. Another friend of mine mentioned that she's been cheated on by every boyfriend she's ever had. And I know a woman that has actively tried to break up relationships because it gives her a sense of power, which I totally understand and find completely deplorable. We know marriage is now very likely to end in divorce, that deep emotional connection is nearly impossible to maintain over decades, and that, apparently, the vast majority of us are cheating or being cheated on. Why are we so terrible at relationships? Perhaps it's because we're holding on to a definition of our most intimate relationships that is outdated. Maybe we're just over it, the idea of committing ourselves to one person forever. Maybe marriage is dying, and I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps it would be best if it did. I know, it breaks my heart too. But just hear me out. What are we really imagining, nay, expecting, when we yearn for our relationships to become marriages? I'm sure everyone's list is a little different, but I'd wager there are a few top items that most have in common. Love, of course, real, actual, deep down, I see you on a soul level love. Commitment, the promise that come hell or high water, we'll be at one another's side until one of us dies. Fidelity, a promise that we will reserve what is ostensibly the most intimate act of human beings solely for our partner. I'm sure you can already see that there are some major pitfalls in these desires, and societally speaking, we've begun to sort of tweak, modify our perception of what constitutes marriage. There are those for whom the commitment part is the most important part, and regardless of the real joy or compatibility between them and their partner, this contractual agreement is going to last. There are those that believe that the commitment part only really works if they acknowledge and accept their flawed humanness and drop the fidelity part. The love part, of course, is as complicated and nuanced as the term itself, and we could spend entire lifetimes trying to decipher or define it. So I'm just going to set that one aside for now and assume, for argument's sake, that it's a non-negotiable element of the kinds of relationships we're talking about here. I think most of us know by now that, as sad as it might seem, the fairy tales of our collective childhood were wrong, and love, in and of itself, does not a happy relationship make, nor a happy marriage. A lesson I learned in my 20s, which is where my exploration of the viability of forever relationships began. After my first marriage ended, I decided I was never going to do that again. Foremost because I realized we'd both changed, big surprise, we were in our freaking 20s, and that I never wanted someone to stay in my life if I was no longer the right partner for them. I also never wanted to be obligated to stay in someone else's life if they were no longer the right partner for me. I wanted my partner to want to be in my life. I didn't want them there because they'd stood up in front of some friends and family and said they would. Several years after my divorce, I met a new guy, a wonderful guy. I was more in love than I had ever been, and I felt absolutely no need to get married. I adopted the perspective that so many of the relationships and specifically marriages around me were failing because the institution of marriage itself was laden with unspoken mandates, requirements. We expect our partner to be both our friend and our lover, expected not only to commit themselves to us sexually but emotionally as well. We want them to truly see us, to understand us, to be there for us when we need them, to fulfill our need to connect with another human mentally and emotionally. We want them to not just know our hopes and dreams but to share them, even to help us work toward them. We want them to be our financial partners, to work with us to build toward a future together. We want them to co-parent with us. We want them to believe in and respect the work we do in the world. We want them to grow, but we want to grow too. And in order to not grow apart, we expect them to grow along with us, at our pace and trajectory, more or less. It just seemed like a lot. So I determined that the solution for me was to drop the marriage certificate. All I really needed from a sexual partner, I decided, was fidelity, emotional and sexual. They didn't have to promise me the future. I just wanted them to promise me that our love was different, special, that they would guard that precious gift in a way commensurate with its profound value and keep their penis from jumping out of their pants and into someone else's. I accepted the fact that I'm not the marrying kind. I'm the one who grows and changes. I'm the one who leaves my relationships because as I get ever more connected to myself, I realize my partner is no longer compatible with the direction in which I'm metamorphizing. Not because there's something wrong with them or even with the way they treat me in the relationship, but rather that it's clear to me that the future I'm growing toward, the future me I'm becoming, won't align with their happiness, with our happiness together. I begin to want and need things from my partner that they can't or don't want to give. But I think I always kind of assumed that taking away the legal element, the piece of paper that obligates this person to me in myriad ways for the rest of my life, was enough. That leaving them legally free to walk out of my life if they found someone more well suited to them meant that I would, or could at least, have a happy relationship, because the same would be true for me. So my partner and I would both be free to leave if we felt the relationship was no longer serving us. Ergo, if we came home to each other every night, remained faithful to each other and the relationship, it would be a healthier commitment that left more space for the happy, right? We wouldn't be together because we promised we would be. We'd be together because we wanted to be. However, as I navigated challenges with Mr. Wonderful that are inherent in every relationship, I realized that even with this man that I thought was more perfect for me than any other had ever been or could be, I was still actually asking a whole fucking lot from this guy. I wanted him to be my everything and to be damn good at every one of those roles. Deep down, I still had the same expectations of my partner, the future version of them, of myself, of what our life would be like together. Deep down, I still wanted the forever partner. I wanted to believe that when I'm old and my tits are flat and I'm rolling through the park instead of walking, he would be at my side or pushing my wheelchair because he wanted to be there. The problems with this theoretic reality, though, I realized, are the same as the problems I had with the idea of marriage to begin with. How could he commit to me sexually and emotionally when I'm going to change sexually and emotionally? Not in my gender identification or even in what I'm attracted to sexually, but just as a sexual being. And there's no guarantee that I will arrive at this future I have planned for us in exactly the way I expect to now. In fact, it's much more likely that it will be a completely different version of reality because it's unlikely I will grow in exactly the way I imagine I will. And what about him? How can I even pretend to be able to accurately imagine a future with a person that is going to grow and change in his own way? I realized that while yes, I really did want these things, the idea that they were actually attainable with one person in one relationship forever and ever were projections from others. This mountain of expectations about him and even myself in this relationship were constructs fed to me on countless fronts, from the church, from my favorite teen love stories, from societal messages in general. Marriage certificate or not, the emotional expectations I'm thrusting upon this imagined person in an unknowable future are massive. Maintaining fidelity in a relationship was never a real challenge for me. While I could acknowledge the attractiveness of another man or even the chemistry I may have with him, it was never profound enough to entice me to cheat. In fact, in my mind, I'd think, "Nice try, hottie, but you have no idea with whom you're competing. My boyfriend is incredible." So, naive or not, I've always dreamed of having a partner who feels similarly. But perhaps it isn't real. I realize that my adoration of my partner, whomever they are or were, is at least in part a farce. I built them up in my mind as an incredible man, and they are, but they're also human and flawed. And based on my experience at that party and countless others, not to mention the prevalence of that theme in media of all kinds, my desire for that kind of blind devotion probably makes me the weird one. It seems to me that cheating is like normal. So pervasive that I'm beginning to wonder if monogamy is something that died along with CDs and MySpace accounts while I wasn't paying attention. Like, perhaps my Cinderella Catholic schoolgirl upbringing led me to believe that forever relationships were really a possibility when it was already being phased out by the mainstream. Perhaps everyone else figured out long ago that humans aren't meant to be in a monogamous relationship, and I'm just hearing the news now. An idea I find utterly devastating. I want there to be forever relationships, and of course they aren't going to be happy ever after every day all the time, but I'd sure like ones that are happy at least a majority of the time and are actually ever after. The thing is, I'm starting to wonder if that expectation is the very thing that's killing my relationships, our relationships. I grew up in a strict Roman Catholic home, one in which even the idea of a spouse cheating on their partner was enough to conjure signs of the cross from the women gathered around the table. Gossiping, obviously, insert obligatory eye roll here. Though in evidence of my current theory, most of my friends have been cheated on, as I mentioned, or cheated on their partner. Even many of my ex-boyfriends lamented a partner that had broken their hearts by cheating. And really, if it's happening this much, what are the chances that I've never been cheated on? It's more likely I just didn't know about it. There's an idea that makes my stomach turn. And I kind of get it. There's a sense of power that comes along with the idea that someone is instantly attracted to you so profoundly, knows nothing about you, and wants to mix energies and bodily fluids. Although I have to admit that when it's happened to me, when a married man has hit on me, the flattery lasts for about a fraction of a second. My disgust at his proposed infidelity and perception of the way he values his wife and relationship last, well, forever, I suppose. So if I still want a committed relationship without the marriage, I'm still putting all those other expectations on a person's fidelity, monogamy. But based on my super scientific research of my friends and their relationships, it seems clear that that isn't really working for us either. A friend of mine has long held the theory that humans aren't designed to be monogamous. We're designed to go after the best possible candidate for our end goals in any given moment, whether that's to procreate or share housing costs or just indulge in human contact with someone. But then in the long run, no matter the commitment, one partner or the other will inevitably cheat, out of boredom or because something is lacking in the relationship or just because it feels damn good to be hit on. His response to the idea that committing to a future with someone when no one can possibly know what will happen between now and then is to free the partners up sexually. Love is eternal in his mind, so he can choose to emotionally commit to his partner, to encourage her and believe in her and support her in making her dreams come true, promise to be by her side as long as he has breath in his body. But feel free to satiate and acknowledge his own changing desires in the sexual context, getting what he needs in terms of freedom and autonomy in his own life while still committing to his love. This solution is devastating to me. I don't want that kind of relationship. I don't want that kind of life. I want the thing that was promised to my 4-year-old heart, that there would be a person who saw me for who I really am, loved me truly, and wanted to invest their heart in me, in a future with me. A partner who wanted to keep what we had sacred. I want someone who sees me as so valuable that they will guard my heart and protect our connection, our relationship, what we've invested in our future together. And I, of course, would do the same. We could rest our hearts in each other, a hope I'm realizing is perhaps both tainted with ego-based pride and unlikely to be manifest. Of course we grow and change. At least I hope so. I hope I'm always growing and changing, which is why I've told partners over and over, if there comes a time in which they are interested in someone else, that they just tell me first, acknowledge that they aren't fully satisfied in our relationship, and let me out of it before they go putting their penis in someone else's box. I also realize that this idea is fraying the edges of my fantasy of being able to rest my heart, to trust that I am safe with a partner in my life for the rest of my life. Because in this scenario, there will always be the possibility that someone else will come along and I'll be cut loose, which is preferable to being cheated on, I suppose, but still not quite the forever sanctuary version of a relationship that I had so hoped for. And I'll still have to be able to trust that if my partner has a real spark of interest in someone, he'll tell me. Except that what I've heard from other women that have taken this approach, their partners don't tell them. At least not ahead of time, not usually. Why? Because if I tell you, you'll leave. Yeah, but isn't that better? Because you want the other girl, right? Oh, but you don't want your long-term partner to leave either because you like everything else about what you have together. So you just want to have a relationship with your partner and sex with someone else. Doesn't it seem like a logical truth that if one person in a relationship is falling for someone outside of the relationship, that something is wrong in the relationship? So fix the relationship? But according to my male friend, the advocate of open relationships, it doesn't signify something is wrong in the relationship when one partner is attracted to or goes after someone outside of it. It's just a natural part of being human, to surrender to our most banal desires once in a while. His lust for another woman, he argues, is momentary. His love and commitment to his girlfriend is forever. They're going on 8 years together, so he's got some good evidence for his case. So maybe open relationships are the future. We seem to collectively embrace, even expect and mandate this idea of monogamy, but the vast majority of our relationships only seem to be happy for a small fraction of that time, usually in the beginning. Maybe then the problem is that we've tied this marriage fairy tale up into the whole thing. What if relationships are failing at an alarming rate, at least according to some, because we're just putting too much pressure on them? What if marriage didn't need to be that? What if we could just say, this is my person until they're not, and get all the same benefits? I can hear my religious mother screaming, but the whole point is the commitment. But is it really? What do we get out of the commitment exactly? The quote-unquote rest that I've been hoping for? Yes, ideally. The stability of belief in a shared future that allows two humans to plan and share resources forever? Definitely. But outside of that, and granted I do really want those things, what good is it being together if you aren't really happy? If the love that we hold so sacred in a relationship has waned or changed or died altogether, what's the point of being together? At that point, aren't you just committed to the commitment and not the person? Actually, I think that is one of my greatest fears, that my theoretic partner will want to be with someone else and miss out on real joy and love because they already promised to do it with me. That they will go on living a life with me that is good enough, but with a massive what if hanging over our relationship. Well, or hanging over him at least. What if he'd gone off with the other woman? Would he be happier? Would they be happier? Would I have found a better for me man? So does that mean then that I will never have a committed relationship? I'm beginning to believe the answer is yes, and that perhaps it's high time I accept that truth. I'll stop pretending that the person I'm with is for forever and realize that they're for now, which is probably a better way of thinking about it anyway, because they're all just for now, even when they want to be and are forever. The problem with that, at least for me, is that it requires emotional distance. Well, maybe it doesn't require it, but that would be my response. I would not want to let myself love that person as deeply as I know I'm able, because at any moment they might not be the right one for me. I actually successfully adopted this perspective for a few years, and it was wonderful. I was single, having fun with the men that crossed my path for the amount of time that was comfortable for me, and then bidding them a usually fond farewell. I took all the real love I wanted and needed from myself, from my connection to the God force within, which, incidentally, is where the self-love workshops and book came from. The reality, though, is that I also realized I wanted someone that was a more permanent fixture in my life. I wanted to build toward a shared future with someone. Women are hardwired to want an emotional connection to their partner, an expectation honed from centuries of actual need. The need for someone to fucking help us keep the new human we'd just pushed out of our vaginas alive. But not so long ago, that responsibility actually fell on the other women in our lives. The men too, of course, but in a completely different way. Not incidentally, a way that defined the male gender for so long that masculinity in and of itself became toxic. As we collectively work to detangle ourselves, our relationships, our personal identities, from what they should be based on what societal, historical, and cultural expectations dictate, perhaps it's time to start rethinking relationships in general. Look, I want the fairy tale to be real. I do. But whether because the palm reader that once told me I was unlucky in love was right, or whether because we've all gotten relationships a little wrong, or whether because I'm just not in the right place in my life or the right version of myself at this time or whatever, the fairy tale doesn't seem to be attainable. At least not for me. But whether we're all a little unlucky in love or a little too quick to pull the trigger even if we're not sure the other person is the right one, or whether because we've just gotten relationships a little wrong, the fairy tale doesn't seem to be attainable, or at least much less often than the idea that was sold to me as a child. Or perhaps repeatedly suffering through the end of relationships that we thought would last forever is just a part of the human experience. One I tried to avoid with the whole self-love and varied sex partners approach, which, as I mentioned, kind of worked. We need, or at least I need, committed long-term relationships. Perhaps the takeaway, at least in my version of reality, is that it's less about taking sanctuary in self-love than it is about accepting that it's going to hurt like fuck at some point, and that the love that you have before the hurt is worth it. Perhaps I need to just accept the fact that there will never be real peace and rest for my heart, not in the context of romantic relationships anyway. At 42 years old and single, however, I've come to ever deeper understandings of the ways in which our other close relationships feed us. How very important they are. Which brings me to my most recent postulation in my view of romantic relationships and commitment, at least for myself. I think it's time to focus on my friends. I'm not suggesting that I'm going to somehow make myself a lesbian, nor am I suggesting that I'm giving up on my dream of a committed heterosexual relationship. I am, however, opening myself up to the idea that what will really provide me with emotional security, sanctuary, that whole rest for my heart thing, and give me a much higher probability of loving my life with another person is planning my future around a woman, my best friend. I mean, it makes sense, really, in my mind at least, rather than hope for a man that will come into my life and somehow magically understand me, despite the fact that we are from two completely different universes emotionally. Hope that he will also be economically responsible and driven to succeed in his own life. Expect that he will love me forever, find me sexually attractive forever, and only want to share his bed with me. What if I just crossed all that shit off of my ideal man list? Then these partners that come into my life could be fun and wonderful until they weren't. If we were happy, really happy, together sexually, romantically, we could stay together as long as we wanted, and there wouldn't be any of the messiness of monogamy or marriage. They'd just be my favorite friends with whom I have great sex. I wouldn't have any expectations of them emotionally. There wouldn't be any commitment to their future goals aligning with mine. No obligation for them to spend time with my family or friends. And my dear best friend would be the person I invested my heart in. the person I planned my future around, the person I promised to take care of to the best of my ability as we got older, as long as I was able. The person that really knew me and understood me and shared my hopes and dreams for my future. Even if they weren't her hopes and dreams, she would certainly be cheering me on. So perhaps the solution, or at least a solution, is less about sexual freedom versus monogamy and more about how we're defining our various long-term relationships. The idea of marriage is actually fairly new in the context of societies, and the idea of marriage for love is an even younger concept. Marriage was originally about property and property sharing. Marriage for love was a religious-based prospect, and we took that idea and ran with it. No wonder marriages fail at such an alarming rate. Maybe we can begin to think of our relationships differently. Look for our soulmates in our friends. Look for sex with whomever we have chemistry with, and depend on ourselves for everything else. When I think of myself as an old person, I think of myself sitting on the porch of a beachfront property on the edge of a European city, laughing and drinking coffee or whiskey depending on the hour of the day. I imagine myself walking around the city shopping, visiting parks and museums, going to old people music festivals. And if past experience is any indication, I'm certain that I would have a lot more fun, a lot more of the time, if I was doing these things with my best friend. And then I could go home to a man that snuggled me while we slept. My money would be mine, my friend would live next door, and I'd get everything I want from happy ever after. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Join us next week for another exploration of the weird, random, and wonderful reality of being human. If you liked this podcast, remember to subscribe and please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/Jacqueline Lene. There you'll also get access to the personal stories of the random ways daily life inspires me to keep growing. And if you'd like to dig in and do some healing through self-love, check out the workshops and personal support sessions available on my website at authorjacquelinelanae.com. That's JACLYNLANAE.com. Thanks for listening.